Hello and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones and we are so glad you joined us today. Governor Phil Murphy is in his second term as New Jersey's 56th governor, and he says he's all about building a stronger and more affordable state. As his time in office, though, nears an end, he must navigate the challenges of limited time and influence. So how does he do that, and what does it mean for those living in New Jersey? Micah Rasmussen of the Rebovich Center for New Jersey Politics at Rider University is standing by to discuss that. First up, though, we're going to be taking a look at the pulse of the people in New Jersey as we welcome Patrick Murray to the show. He is a pollster from Monmouth University Polling Institute and has been conducting public opinion research for over 30 years. Patrick, it's good to see you. Welcome.
It's good to be with you, Laura.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about one of your more recent polls, which shows Chris Christie running for president head-to-head with Donald Trump. He loses 82 to 12%. Not surprising. I'm actually surprised he's got 12%.
I mean, there is a base of support for Chris Christie there, but I mean, you're seeing that number is just incredible. Just to put it in comparison, we did a number of different head-to-heads, and this is in a national electorate of Republicans against somebody like Tim Scott. Tim Scott gets about double what Chris Christie gets against Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis, who's probably the strongest in the field as the Trump alternative, gets about 3 times as much as Christie supports. So there's no other candidate. It's not like Chris Christie is the only candidate trailing, although he's trailing by a lot more than any other Republican in that field, and why he does have that 12% support or whatever it is. There's a lot of voters, more than for any other announced candidate in the field, who say, I don't like Chris Christie. It's amazing. He gets the highest unfavorable rating among Republican voters of any of the contenders in the field, and that's even more so than Mike Pence, who's considered a traitor by many because of his actions on January 6th. A majority of Republican voters just simply say, I don't like Chris Christie, which means his ceiling for getting support is very low to begin with.
Yeah, why do you think that is?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting because even Mike Pence's rating hasn't always been this negative. Chris Christie has been kind of solid. He started out pretty strong back. We have to go back to 2015, actually, when he was first running for president. And his numbers were decent, but not great. And then they started going downhill. A lot of that was this kind of, he was considered a bit of a traitor when those images resurfaced from his time during both the Superstorm Sandy and Hurricane Irene, when he met with the President Barack Obama at the time. And there's one where they're kind of arm in arm and called the hug. We all remember that picture. And for some reason, that sticks in Republicans' craw for a variety of reasons. So then you have him get on board with Donald Trump and then suddenly turn on Donald Trump. And throughout that entire time, though, his numbers have consistently been negative. He's been one of the most negatively rated Republican figures within the Republican Party since 2016.
Yeah, and part of his role, of what I'm reading a little bit more behind the scenes, and part of his role in the presidential election, he wants to be president, but also is more of a spoiler, more of somebody who will go after Donald Trump. Why is he running, do you think? And is that a specific role that maybe whoever ultimately gets the Republican nomination, then Chris Christie might get a spot as Attorney General or something else in another administration?
That's an interesting supposition, and certainly this is kind of a parlor game right now in New Jersey of trying to figure out what Chris Christie is thinking. And so anything that I can say here is pure speculation. It's between him, his advisors, and maybe his therapist, exactly what his motivations are, because we know, we all know Chris Christie. We followed him closely. This is a guy who doesn't do things unless he's going to get something, it's going to further his own ambitions. And none of us see a path for him doing that. So what role does he play? But it could possibly be something just as simple as kind of revenge. I mean, remember, he was back there in 2020. He was helping Donald Trump In his reelection, he was prepping him for his debates there. He was playing a significant role, even though he had kind of been dissed by the Trump administration in other roles that he wanted to play in that administration. And of course, he got COVID during those preparations because Donald Trump didn't tell anybody he had COVID when he was in those meetings. And as we know, Chris Christie was very, very seriously ill from COVID, significantly ill, according to published reports. Who knows? Maybe it's just a revenge tour for Chris Christie. I don't know what the end game is. None of us know. It'll be, but it's with Chris Christie. It's always fascinating just watching what happens.
Right. Oh, and the other thing to take into consideration, when you look at the poll that you're referencing, it has Trump, obviously way ahead at 54%, DeSantis at 22%, and then the other four are all pretty much tied between Mike Pence, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, and U.S. Senator Tim Scott. They're all kind of tied. So, and it is early. We're still 2 years out. A lot can change.
Yeah, well, I mean, or a year and a half out. I mean, really, we're talking about Iowa and New Hampshire coming up in January and February of next year. I mean, we're half year out, I should say. So, it's really ramping up right now, very, very quickly. That I think the key, though, is going to be the debate at the end of August.
Right.
This is where this is what Chris Christie wants to do. This is what some of the other candidates want to do, although they've been tap dancing around it a little bit more. Chris Christie has been certainly the most forceful in going after Donald Trump. The only problem is that gambit doesn't work if Donald Trump doesn't show up on the debate stage. And so I think that's going to be kind of an interesting to see, because if I was going to put money on something right now, I would say there's no Donald Trump in that August debate.
Right, and that is a big question. Is he going to show up? Is he not going to show up? Nobody knows right now, and that's part of his strategy,
Right.
I guess.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a significant part of his strategy. I mean, he's ahead by, even in the crowded field and head-to-heads, he's ahead by double digits, 20 points or more in almost every poll in the Republican nominating process, whether it's a national poll or Iowa or New Hampshire. We've never seen somebody lose who's been that far ahead before. So why go out and put yourself in the firing line?
Well, especially given everything that is happening with indictments. I mean, there's so much so fluid that even as we speak, who knows what else might be coming up or alleged against him as well.
Yeah. And those things just actually seem to make him stronger, to be honest with you. When we asked Republicans nationally what they thought about the indictments, they said they're no concern with, they don't think it's going to affect him one way or the other in terms of his strength as a candidate. So it's kind of when you're talking about, his main appeal being the kind of the politics of grievance and the system is out to get you, the indictments only prove the point to those voters. And so that's why he continues to hold on to that kind of that MAGA core will not depart from him.
Right. And there are a lot of people who have a hard time believing and digesting that Donald Trump could have this much support. So can you talk a little bit about how you actually poll people to ensure you really are getting an honest opinion? Because a lot of times I'll talk to people and I'll talk to Republicans and they we don't like Donald Trump, but how does he have such high numbers? Can you kind of show us behind the curtain how this works?
Yeah, I mean, sure. There's always questions about polling, and they've surfaced recently. And when you throw Donald Trump in the mix, that does raise a lot of questions. And certainly over the past few years in the polling industry, we've been dealing with that. We continue to do, those of us who adhere to high standards of transparency and methodology, of doing everything that we can to reach people on cell phones, on regular phones. There's online panels. We text them, we call them, all sorts of things to reach people. Now the question is, we are convinced pretty clearly that we have access to getting in contact with everybody. It's whether people are willing to talk to us. We have found that when Donald Trump is not in the mix, that our polls are pretty good when we hold them up to other benchmarks, whether it's vaccination rates or other elections outside of ones that Donald Trump are involved with. When Donald Trump's involved, we seem to have this issue with the polls being off by 2 points, 3 points, 4 points consistently. And so that's the thing that we're going to have to take into account. But the underlying um, process of doing a poll, the underlying legitimacy and accuracy of polling continues to hold. I mean, remember, polling is a snapshot. Polling is an estimate. It is not precise, and it's never meant to be precise. And when we get to these close elections that are decided by 2 or 3 points, polling can only give you kind of a sense of whether it's close or not. But it really can't tell you exactly what's going to happen. And I think that's part of the problem is when Donald Trump's in the mix, if something's off by 2 or 3 points and we're talking about a 2 or 3 point election, then everybody says the polls were wrong when the polls could only get so close in the end. So, when we're talking about the Republican primary right now, when somebody's up by 20 points or 25 points, they might not win by 20 or 25 points, but it would be a shocker, certainly, of polling if they would end up losing that type of election.
Right. And that's, like you said, it is a snapshot. The numbers may not be completely accurate, but it's telling you something. It's telling you a trend. So, can you talk a little bit about the challenges that you face when conducting polls, knowing and understanding and then presenting that information to people so they understand that context?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, we talk a lot about the election polling and the questions that we ask about who's ahead or who's behind. I try to steer away from that or kind of put that in the background to why people are doing what they're doing, because that's where polling works best. When we ask questions of people about how they're doing in their day-to-day life, if we ask questions about, what's important to them, what they're concerned about in that day, and then we ask them questions in the political realm about what issues are important or whether they are hearing the messages that candidates are putting forward. And that's where polling seems to work best. That's where we do our job well. So in terms of turning that around, and we try to ask questions in the way that people talk about the issues that are important to them and hopefully turn that around in a way that makes sense. The one thing that is very difficult for us to get through, though, is that we kind of self-segregate. And that's happening more and more, and it's happened more and more the past 20 years. And by self-segregate, I mean, in terms of our political views, we tend to hang out with people who have the same political views. And so that when you see a poll that says, 60% think something different than what you think, you turn around and say, well, I don't know anybody who thinks that way. It was certainly not 60%. And that's kind of trying to break through that kind of barrier that we've created around us, that we're only surrounding ourselves with like-minded people. And that's where polling should be doing its job in trying to, kind of give a reality check to, not in your little world, but in other worlds, there are significant parts of the country that think differently than you do.
And that is a very interesting and very valid point you bring up, because when I'm in the Northeast, there is a very different mindset as opposed to when I'm in the South. And it's something I think even almost unique to the New York area and even the New York media market. It's like whatever is big news here tends to dominate the national stage. Whereas if something big happened in Florida, where I grew up, it may not get the same coverage. So that is an interesting bias that you're pointing out, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, Patrick Murray, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, explain a little bit about the latest polls and also how those polls are conducted. We really appreciate seeing you and your time.
It's my pleasure, Laura, as always.
Governor Phil Murphy is currently serving his second term in office, and there are several issues at stake during his remaining time as a lame duck governor. Micah Rasmussen is a political science professor and director of the Rebovich Institute for New Jersey Politics at Rider University. He also worked for former Governor Jim McGreevey and is here now to discuss how the governor might navigate this time left and what it means for those living in the Garden State. Micah, it's good to see you. Welcome.
You too, Laura. Happy summer.
Oh, happy summer to you too. So listen, before we get into this, I've noticed you've done a little decorating in your office since I last saw you, and you've got a collection behind you. I've got to ask, what is the collection behind you?
Well, it's pretty specific. There's no bigger race in New Jersey than our governor's races. It's 125 years of gubernatorial matchups in New Jersey. So it goes back to the beginning of campaign pins in 1896, and it takes us up through today with Murphy and Chitterelli on the bottom here.
Okay, that is really very, very cool. Now, how long have you been collecting that?
This is a couple of years in the making, and the hardest, the last piece of the puzzle was Peter Shapiro, Tom Caine's opponent in 1985. It was not much of a race, so I think that it was a pretty rare one to come by.
Oh, so they just didn't make a lot of swag back then.
I think that's it. I think that's
Oh,
it.
that is
Yeah,
very cool.
yeah.
That is very cool. All right. Well, we'll get back to the topic of Governor Phil Murphy. So, what do some of the key issues, initiatives that Governor Murphy has launched during his time in office? How does he ensure that he continues to be successful as he approaches the end of his term?
That's a great question, and I think that that is really this 2 year period snuck up on us since his last election, since 2021. He's already half done with it, and we are now approaching his last midterm election, the midpoint when the legislature will be up. Typically, a time where it's a referendum on the party in power and the governor in power. So that'll be something that takes place. We also get into a little bit of fatigue after 6 years of one party and one person in office. And I wouldn't say that he is suffering in the polls. I would say that his numbers are sort of settling down to earth. The enthusiasm, the early honeymoon period, that's all over. And so we're in a period where people are really assessing who they want to lead the state for the next 2 years. Do they want it to be another 2 years with the Democrats, or do they want to give Murphy a check in Trenton and give one or both houses of the legislature over to the Republicans for the last 2 years he has in office?
Yeah. So really, that power is starting to shrink. So with that, what role do boards, commissions, authorities play in New Jersey politics, and can the governor use these bodies to kind of advance his agenda with what time he has left in office?
That's a great question, Laura. As you know, and really one of the reasons why I focus on governor so much is because ours is so powerful structurally. He or she appoints 15,000 people to different boards over the course of his time in office. They're enormously powerful. So, for example, the person that he appoints, Chris Calori, to lead the Gateway effort, building the new infrastructure in and out of New York. The people who he appoints to lead New Jersey Transit. So almost everything he does, he can have fingerprints all over state government and all over the projects in and out of state government because of the people he appoints. And hopefully they do a job that's consistent with the leadership that he wants to exercise across the state.
Now, with that, then how does Governor Murphy work with members of the opposition party, the Republicans, to achieve his goals? And again, given that he has just 2 years left in this 8-year tenure as governor.
It'll depend on issue by issue. So there are some areas where he is getting staunch opposition. For example, on renewable energy right now, he wants to really ramp up our offshore wind program, lease our offshore assets that we have. He wants to phase out combustion engines in cars by 2035 and ramp up electric cars and electric building envelopes by 2035. He's encountering stiff opposition to those because Republicans see that as a winning issue for them. They see opposition to that. And so they are not giving him any sway on that. On other issues, he is finding cooperation. So, for example, on ramping up our credit ratings, doing full pension payments, letting the corporate business tax surcharge sunset. Those are all cumulative effects that have led to New Jersey being named the most improved state to do business last year. And so he's getting a lot of cooperation there. So it really depends on issue by issue. Transgender rights, that's a cultural issue he believes very strongly in, Democrats believe very strongly in. He's getting opposition from Republicans. So it's really a case by case, and you find the issues where you have something in common.
And in November, we have the legislative midterm elections, so to speak. Do you see any of these issues really being what drives voters, and it's going to be low turnout to the polls? Or is it going to be, okay, yeah, what do you think we're going to be hearing about in these midterms coming up?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It will be a low turnout election. There's not one overarching issue that you're going to see statewide play in every one of the 40 districts where there are races. For one thing, a lot of those races are not competitive. There are probably about 4 or 5 or maybe 6 races across the state. So there's pockets in Atlantic County or Salem County or Monmouth County or Somerset County where we have hot races, and those races will sway on They will turn on local issues that matter the most in those districts, votes those individual legislators have made. You will see some attempt on the part of Republicans who are leading the opposition. You will see some issues in common that they will try to make, like this renewable energy or like transgender rights. The problem I think they have and they play, those issues may play in some individual districts, the rights of parents and the involvement of parents in the lives of students, that kind of thing. Um, the problem that I think that Republicans have in playing those issues statewide is that New Jersey is a pretty tolerant state, and New Jersey is a pretty progressive state when it comes to renewable energy, for example. So issues like how much it's going to cost, very much an issue. Issues like, are we committed to the rights of transgender students, or are we committed to renewable energy? That's where they're going to have a hard time getting the state on board with those.
And we've heard Governor Murphy talk about the issue of mental health. He's working with some organizations to really partnership and to address mental health. But overall, as we look at the challenges the governor is facing in New Jersey, how does he use his time in office to address them? Because I keep going to affordability. Above all, that's the one thing that affects everybody, and it seems to be a persistent issue in New Jersey.
It's difficult, and that's why you see Democrats in the legislature that have championed this Stay NJ property tax proposal to cut seniors' property taxes in half. And it's something that's not going to get done in 1 year. In fact, it's a proposal that will begin. They'll see more money this year, but they will also not have full implementation of the program for another couple of years. So Republicans are going to say, that's great, but you should be skeptical that it's ever going to happen, right? You're going to see Democrats campaigning on cutting property taxes in half for senior citizens in the state. And Republicans will challenge that and say that's not really ever going to happen.
What about Governor Murphy's relationship with other governors and national political figures? How does he use that to advance his agenda? Because before we had Joe Biden announce that, yes, he is going to run for president again, for re-election, there's always talk of the New Jersey governor, and Phil Murphy's name comes up. So how does he work with those national figures to keep himself relevant and also to keep his issues in the forefront?
Well, what I've seen most of all from him since the time when it's become clear that President Biden is running for re-election and that there's not going to be another campaign for president other than his on the Democratic side. What I've seen most from Murphy is the idea of him being a surrogate for the Biden campaign, going out and speaking on behalf of Biden, on behalf of the economy that continues to improve, continues to be validated. Inflation is coming down, right? New Jersey's got its own spin on how things are improving and how the Bidenomics really dovetails with Murphonomics, if you want to call it that. Those kind of bad phrasing, but they go together to some extent. They dovetail with each other. Their records dovetail with each other. So he is out there talking on behalf of the president, and I don't know if he knows what the next opportunity is going to be at this point. I just know that he enjoys being in that national limelight. He enjoys playing that role on behalf of the party, as he's done for a long time. Even before he was governor, he was raising a lot of money for Democrats nationally. And so I think he probably looks forward to continuing to play that role in the future, and he'll know what the opportunity is when it presents itself. And so by staying out there, that'll come along to him sooner or later.
So on the flip side of that, how is Governor Murphy working with local leaders and also community organizations to address the issues and keep it local, as local news gets? So
that's a great question. And I think we're going to see whether or not issues like racial integration of our schools, right? Something you don't hear a lot about, but it's something that a group of advocates in New Jersey have been suing on behalf of the students of the state for a long time. We have some of the most segregated schools in the entire nation, which sounds completely counterintuitive, but it is very much the case. It's largely a function of what you talked about earlier, which is how many school districts we have. We carve them up into little pieces, right? And so issues like that are going to come along over the next 2 years, issues that could really change the way affordable housing, right? So those are very much community by community issues, and they have to make sense for each individual community. It can't be a top-heavy, we're going to force one approach on everybody. And so he really is going to have to work with individual mayors, individual communities, if he wants to get it right in a way that makes sense, if he wants the kind of legacy. For example, Sue Livio just wrote a great piece on how Cumberland County is challenged, and it's the forgotten county. It's really doing the worst in terms of employment, in terms of healthcare outcomes. It's really doesn't match the wealth of this state at all.
What type of legacy do you think Phil Murphy will leave behind?
No question, we're going to see. I think the credit ratings. Remember how bad New Jersey's finances were before Phil Murphy's time in office. He's very proud to have turned that around, and I think rightfully so. I think he deserves credit for that. I think you're going to see those infrastructure projects, like getting the Gateway Tunnel moving after so many years of stagnation. So I think those are the kinds of issues that we will remember for his time in office. Clearly, there are other ones that he wants to be identified with going forward, like renewable energy, like a fairer New Jersey, on issues like who pays for what, and on the rights of those who have been marginalized. He wants to be remembered for all of those things. So I think you're going to see him burnishing his accomplishments in those areas over the final 2 years that he has in office.
Micah Rasmussen, the Rebovich Institute for New Jersey Politics at Rider University. Thank you so much for your time. It's always good talking to you.
Thank you, Laura. It's fun.
And that will do it for today. Thank you so much for watching New Jersey Politics. I am Laura Jones, and we will see you back here next time.